Hi. Kick and bass are what get your heart pumping in electronic music. But they're hard to do right because they occupy the same part of the spectrum. Enter TRK-01 from Native Instruments, a software instrument or plugin designed to get the heart of your track going. Now, I have a few things I wish they added to this, and I'll talk about that later, but get your speakers or good headphones, and I'll give you a few examples of what this thing does and how it does it. Just one note, you don't need any hardware to run this. I'm using Complete Control, the keyboard by Native Instruments that's mapped automatically to a lot of the parameters here, and you can use the Maschine hardware as well, but this is a software-only plugin, so you don't need any hardware. Like I said, it works standalone or within your DAW. And with that said, let's get going. Now, the preset loops are a big part of what you get with TRK-01. And the nice thing about them is that unlike regular sample loop libraries, they're all synthesized sounds. So they're really a starting point or an idea that it's up to you to develop rather than something you're stuck with. Okay, let's get going. So first, on a high level, there's a left and right section and a top and bottom section. The left side is your kick and the right side is your bass, and the top part is your sound design section, and the bottom part is your sequencer and master effects. There's also a top strip up here for tuning and timing. The top part also has some copy-paste functions. We'll get to that. Okay, let's take a little deeper look at what controls we have here. On the kick side, you get two layers, where you can create two completely separate and different sounds. So for example, if you listen closely, you'll hear a kick and a rim, and this mixer knob is sequenced to play one or both. Each percussion layer can contain a sound based on a sample or a synth, and there also is rumble and noise. Each layer has a resonant multimode filter with drive. There are a few sample categories, and in each category you get a few samples. And you can also load your own samples if you want. It's important to keep your kick sample in tune with your bass if it's pitched, so you can control that as well as the start and stop of the sample. There's also a synth engine if you want to create your kicks that way. And then there's the rumble engine, which is sine and noise, and then just noise if you want. Okay, let's get back to our samples. So aside from sound sources, you've got plenty of modulation options. You've got two envelopes, which you can route to any one of a number of destinations. And you've got an LFO with multiple interesting shapes. And you can add noise to it to make it wobble. I love how you see previews of the waveforms here. Anyway, same deal with destinations here. If you want to map a destination, just set your modulation amount where you want the LFO or envelope to apply, and notice how the control now is wiggling based on the frequency of the LFO. The kick section has its own effects with insert effects, an EQ, and output control for overall levels, and delay and reverb sends. There's also a compressor section with quite a few individual controls. So that is the kick section in a nutshell. Let's take a look at the bass. The bass section is a little bit different. There are 5 different synth engines in it. The first is called Classic, which has 2 core waveforms, saw and square and lets you morph between them and add a sub oscillator and another VCO as well, VCO2. So that's nice and classic. And then there's Super, which gives you 5 more saws or squares. West Coast is the third engine, which is basically a wave folder. So you can get your boucle on. Next up is an FM synth. Cool. And then the 5th engine is modern, which is basically a wavetable synth. You've got plenty of waveforms to choose from, and then you can morph between them. Very cool sound shaping options here, and there are a few other parameters that you can mess with. Really nice stuff, and quite a capable synth in here. Now, aside from the core synth engines, there are modifiers, ring mod, and a few others. And again, how cool is this waveform preview to know exactly what's going on? Sample and hold is sort of bit crush, and we can't hear this because it's before the filter. Here we go. Now we can hear it. Cool. So those are the modifiers, filter. We've got cutoff and resonance, of course, and then feedback as well. And if you've got the native instruments controllers, you can just hop on here. And the nice thing is that the knobs are in groups of 8s, so they're aligned very intuitively. The filter has a few slope options, an interesting 8-pole if you want, and also notch option, which sounds pretty cool. Cool. Now, just like the kick, you have modulation options. You've got 2 envelopes and an LFO, and getting it to modulate something is super easy. There are a few usual but important LFO options. You can have it free running or synced to the tempo. Cool. The effects section for the bass has its own special effects. You can turn insert effects on and off, and then there's really nice visualizations for each of the effects, and there's EQ and output controls, just like the kick. The effects section also has a compressor, just like the kick, but there's a really nice feature here, which is the duck envelope. So ducking is a modulation similar to sidechain, also helps your kick and bass live together. You choose a destination, and every time there's a kick, you can have the volume lowered. And if you don't want ducking to affect the entire frequency spectrum, you can just impact, for example, the low end. So I'll increase the modulation for the low EQ, and you can see it here. Nice visual representation of what's going on. You've got nice control over the waveform of the ducking envelope. So if your pigeons aren't getting your mail to where it should be, you can always use duck envelopes. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay, back to our scheduled programming. There are curves for the envelopes, which is cool. And that's pretty much it for synthesizing basses. Now let's move on to the sequencer. And I'll pick a different loop to keep it interesting. Alright. Okay, so the sequencer on track 1 is extremely powerful. Left side is kick, and right side is the bass, When you toggle between them, you can see the color of the sequence in the middle change. You've got up to 4 pages of up to 16 steps each, and it can be polymetric. So for example, this kick sequence is 12 steps, and this bass sequence is 9 steps. You've got 8 sequence slots, and you can copy and paste between them. And editing sequence steps is super simple and fast. You can take your mouse and swipe, or edit step by step. Now, what I'm controlling now is velocities. That's on the kick side. On the bass side, I'll take this pattern, copy it, and paste it. On the bass side, you get 2 controls. You've got velocity and pitch as well. And I'm editing this page now, so just to hear it, I will shorten the number of pages to 1. It'll be a bit repetitive, but now you can hear the pitch changes. It would have been nice if they had note options here and not just semitone steps. Maybe in a future version? Anyway, where the sequencer gets really powerful is with parameter locks. So if you look at the lock row, see these little locks here? Every one of these represents a change in, not in velocity, because we see that up top, but rather in a different parameter. And you can tell which parameter is locked because its knob is white. And you can see the little dot on the circumference move based on the parameter lock. And this is toggling in the mix between layer A and layer B, the kick and the hi-hat. Now, any of these knobs can be motion sequenced as well by clicking on the label. So for example, if I wanted to parameter lock or motion sequence the drive, I would click it. And once I do that, the bottom sequencer now becomes the drive sequencer, not the velocity sequencer. And once I draw the sequence, look at the circumference of the knob, you can see that it's changing accordingly. And I could do the same thing for the filter cutoff, or the resonance. And I could keep adding these, and to figure out which parameters are affected, all I have to do is go back to the lock, and the affected knobs are white. And that's how you build your various patterns in the different slots. And later on, I'll show you how to sequence them. Okay, let's move on to the second thing you can do on the bottom row, which is the Master Effects section. Now, as you may remember, before we used the delay and reverb sends to apply these effects to a sound, and this section is where we determine the actual delay and reverb characteristics. And alongside those, you have these bass and booster controls. Yeah, much better on. Alright, now just like you can store 8 patterns, you can store 8 sounds per kick or bass. Now you can actually change sound or pattern slots using an external keyboard. Now you can use any keyboard for this, but the complete control lights up to help you figure out what's going on. This octave lets you swap kick sounds, and track 1 will synchronize with your DAW, so you can send MIDI notes to achieve the same effect. And then this octave changes the bass sounds. And then you can also swap patterns in the sequencer using this octave for the kick. And then this octave changes bass patterns. And like I said before, you can use TRK-01 in your DAW and use any one of these notes to change sounds or patterns. Just send the right MIDI note and the pattern or respective sound will change. So that's how you sequence sounds and patterns in track 01 or TRK-01. Anyway, that was the bottom section, and there's one more thing I want to show you, which is a few more things in the top section right here. So before we saw there was copy and paste here, but if you click these buttons, there are tuning and timing controls. On the timing side, you can add swing. And again, we have a very nice visual representation of what swing is. And then you can further add groove to that. And again, you can see visually what's going on. It's sort of like a variation to swing. There's also triplet timing and eighths. So that's the timing section. And then for tuning, I'll play one more pattern for you. So there's master tuning control here. You can change octaves, and you've also got support for scales. Octave transpose here, change scales here, and you can also transpose chromatically here. So that's one way to transpose. You can also hold Control on the keyboard and click the on-screen keyboard. Just hit the target here. Now, unfortunately, you can't transpose with an external keyboard, and you can't transpose these sequences from your DAW either. Actually, you can't play any of the synth or percussion sounds using a keyboard or a MIDI. So if you were to ask me what was the one wishlist feature or con to track 01, it would be this. And I wouldn't be surprised if they add this feature in the future, because I think it makes a lot of sense. But for now, if that's important to you, you need to know that it's not there. So that is track 01 or TRK-01 from Native Instruments. There are about 200 of these patterns in it, and they sound pretty darn good. And like I said, they're a place for you to start. They're not something you're stuck with. So what do I think about track 01? Well, if you're listening with good speakers, you already know. If you like this style of reviews of synthy stuff, please hit the subscribe button and ring the little notification bell. Hit like if you learned something. Ask any questions in the comments section below. Thanks very much for watching.